The Subway $3 flatbread breakfast combo is the best deal around. Get a 6-inch flatbread breakfast sandwich with a 16-ounce cup of coffee or 21-ounce fountain drink, all for just $3. It's flat out delicious. Subway, eat fresh. The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects.
First of all,
This is the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
it might be cool, I don't know. And if it's not, I don't
The
care.
BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Bill Simmons works for ESPN. He's also named the sports guy, and he writes a comical sports column. He must be a popular dude.
The BS Report.
It's got a real dirty sound, like a rusty steak knife cutting through a well-aged steak.
Now.
Here's Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report. We are going to talk a little football and a little baseball today because I have been going crazy on greatone.com writing about the NBA. We're in the middle of my 12 days of NBA Christmas. Need a break from that. We have Jacko coming up a little bit later talking about baseball, Pujols, the Yankees, the Red Sox, all that good stuff. But now, our favorite from the NFL.com, NFL Network, we're going to talk some football with the one and only Mike Lombardi. What's happening?
Hello, Bill.
Tebow.
Tebow, you cannot ignore it. You know, it was
Tebow,
so
are you
good.
in? Are you a believer?
I wrote a column the other day that, look, I think this spread attack, the way Tebow does it, Cam Newton does it to a degree, is a place for a team that doesn't have the great quarterback, and it can balance the field a little bit. I think Dennis Dixon from the Pittsburgh Steelers next year might be a commodity because I think if you're smart and you have a chance to improve your team, what's the easiest way to do it? If you're at Air Force, you run the wishbone, the option. If you're in the NFL, you try to do something different, and I think this does make a point. I'm a believer. I think he's made the team much tougher.
We talk about football and we always look at it from like, oh, that team has talent, that team doesn't have as much talent, things like that. And yet we learn every year that football isn't just about talent. It's about how the team, the chemistry of a team, the coaching, the little things, the fact that if they feel like nobody believes in them, the overachieving, all that stuff. It feels like this whole Tebow thing has kind of fallen into that whole sphere, right? Like this is a team that is now overachieving, that believes it can win close games, and does it even have to make sense?
Exactly, and I think what Tebow's given, what people overlook, is the toughness element that he's brought to the team. They can run the ball more effectively because you always become something you practice a lot of, and they practice obviously running the football, so they become very good at it, proficient at it. And Willis McGahee, who when they signed him, I thought, wow, that's really not a smart signing. He looks done. He's had a resurgence.
Yeah.
They have and Tebow's 245 pounds, hard to tackle. So I think it's made them tougher offensively. It's taken away their weaknesses. Their right tackle doesn't have to pass protect all the time. And now they can kind of punt the ball. And then their strength on defense is their two rushers. And they've become better run defense because their offense is running the football. So it's kind of been a little bit of a whole impact on the team. I think the one thing we've learned is you want your quarterback to have the personality of the team, and I think that's what's happened here. If your quarterback's Aaron Brooks, your personality is going to be a little loose and not very effective. If your quarterback's Tim Tebow, it's going to be serious and competitive.
And if your quarterback's Donovan McNabb, your spirit's going to be overweight and kind of nonchalant. And so on and so on.
Refused to run scout team as a third string quarterback. I thought it was hilarious that all the Donovan McNabb supporters who criticized me for saying he didn't want to work hard and all that the day they cut McNabb, they claimed Sage Rosenfels because they still wanted a third string quarterback.
Right.
And all the stuff that came out, well, we thought we'd move in another direction, was basically we needed Donovan out of the locker room.
Right. And nobody claimed him. And, I've pointed this out earlier in the week, but, he's so fat that he had to grow that neck beard to hide the double chin. Like, he's just so out of shape. I don't understand. You're 34 years old. You're a borderline Hall of Famer. You really could have, maybe locked up the Hall of Fame here with these last couple years, and instead you're just out of shape. And I don't think he'll start for an NFL team ever again, is my take. Do you agree?
Look, I'm not going to criticize chins because I got enough of them to last a lifetime. But the reality is, he he just doesn't want to work hard. I think he thinks he can rest on his laurels. And the reality of his situation is, whether he wants to admit it or not, is it's going to be television or nothing for Donovan. I don't think a team's – no, I don't think. I know a team's not going to give him an opportunity to come back and be a starting quarterback, or they're going to pay him money to be a starting quarterback. Not a chance. And I think he's going to have to realize, whether it's ESPN, NFL Network, that might be the best avenue for me.
And, by the way, he'll be really good. I think he'll be good on television. I don't think he'll be as good as Ray Lewis will be. I think Ray Lewis is my bet to be the next Barkley. I think he's going to be amazing. McNabb will be good. He'll be somebody that I could totally see on one of our shows or one of your NFL Network shows or whatever. He should not play quarterback anymore. It does bug me when guys getting paid a lot of money and whose only job is to play sports for a living aren't in shape. It just seems incongruous to me.
Yeah,
It's your one responsibility is to be prepared, or two. You have be prepared, be in shape. Those are your two responsibilities as a professional athlete. Show up on time. Like, it's all basic stuff. Like, you can't stay in shape, then I don't know, how can we take you seriously? Back to Tebow for a second. You're the GM of the Broncos. You're probably going to win the AFC West this year. Now you're planning the next couple years. You decide you're building the team around Tebow. What are the three most important things you can get at that point? You want a killer tight end, right? And then you want what else?
Well, I want to continue to build the defense, because with Tebow, I have to be really good on defense. I can't let the game ever get away from me. So I'm going to be dominant in both offensive and defensive lines, and I'm just going to make sure that I can control the game with my defense, with my kicking game particularly. I'm going to make sure I have great returners, because vertical field position with Tebow is so important to make sure you have that element squared away. And I'm just going to continue to build the team in terms of offensive and defensive linemen and be strong in those areas. No different than you should build a team anyway. I mean, I think that's the biggest. People say to me all the time, what would you do if you were Tebow? Just continue. The job of a personnel director is to procure talent and have the most talent of any team. That's the job. And so you just keep adding talent to your team. Keep adding it. Hope Tebow grows. If a quarterback happens to be there in the second round and you like him, draft him. There's no saying you have to absolutely be married to Tebow. Let Tebow continue to work hard. Let him. But the one thing you're not going to do is run Tebow out of the locker room and think you're going to maintain the integrity of your team, because you'll lose your team if you try to do that.
Well, and also, I think the Tebow thing has gotten to the point in Denver where they are now. I think they don't really have a choice. I think there would be like a full-fledged revolt. But these guys, Denver loves Tebow, they're just good enough with him that you have to make the case that they have to ride this out now. It's like you can't just say, yeah, we're not sure, we didn't realize this guy was going to be available in the first round, and we think he's going to be good too, and we'll have two quarterbacks. I just don't think you can do that. I think you're in on Tebow now, and you just have to ride out the next couple of years.
I agree, and I think ultimately what happened was Denver thought they would play Tebow, and after 2 games would be able to move on with the rebuilding of their team. And so what they found out was the rebuilding of the team exists around Tebow.
Doesn't this tie back to something that you and I have talked about in this podcast for 3-4 years now about the personality of a quarterback being so much more important than any other attribute? I mean, we talked about percentages, like is it 60%, 70%, 75%, I don't know. But you have to have a certain charisma, attitude, leadership, stuff that has nothing to do with how good you hit a 15-yard out or what your 40 time is, all this stuff. Like, Tebow is the embodiment of that, isn't he?
Yeah, it's all about leadership. And you need, the coach needs to be a good leader, and the quarterback has to be a good leader. He has to be the guy that can inspire and be inspirational to the players. And I think Tebow does that very well. And his work ethic, it's not phony. He shows up, he works hard, he competes hard, so then everybody rises to the level that he's set, which is important. It's the same thing that happens in Green Bay. It's the same thing that happens in New Orleans. The same thing happens in New England. And that's the best. Those are the kind of players that when it's 3rd and 7 in the biggest game of the year, you feel comfortable that they're prepared to make the play that they have to make.
And there's no stat that will ever be able to quantify that quality. It just doesn't exist.
No, I don't think there is. I think it's there. It's a trait, and I think now that you've seen Tebow do this, you have to keep expanding on what he can do, and he's going to improve to get better at what he does.
Round 1, let's say Denver wins the division, which I think they're going to, because I think this Oakland team's about to implode. Round 1, Baltimore at Denver. Probably a night game. Probably, definitely a sellout. Baltimore's probably favored, but I'm going to say 6 points. On paper, everybody's like, Baltimore's just better. Their defense is going to eat up Tebow, blah, blah, blah. Do you think Denver has a chance in that game?
I think Denver has a chance in any game because especially with Baltimore, who never really runs away from anyone. I mean, Baltimore's, they want to run the football effectively. I think Denver's played the run much better. They want to throw the ball vertically to Torrey Smith, who's been really good for them. And I think Denver can handle that. And if it gets to a passing situation, I think Denver can expose the tackles for the Ravens with their two outside rushers. So I think it'll be a close game. The other factor, Denver's won so many road games lately that I think has been misunderstood, is the Mile High factor. Chasing Tebow around in the Mile High is going to be exhausting. And if the game comes down to a series in the fourth quarter and you've been running him or we've been running around, you've got to control the time of possession because your defense in the fourth quarter, their legs will get weary if you're not able to have some rest. And I think that's when Tebow really becomes even a better player because he's hard to tackle. I have not seen him tackled yet where he's been knocked back. I have not seen him tackled where he's absorbed the hit and the defender hasn't. I have not seen it. He dishes out punishment, and the longer the round goes, the longer the fight goes, people get less and less. You think Cromartie wanted to tackle him in the Jet game?
Well, and then, even on the other end, because of their two pass rushers, the tackles on the other team in Mile High would get worn down a little bit too, right?
No question. So you have to play Tebow. Look, the key to beating Tebow is not with your defense and stopping Tebow. The key to beating Tebow is to score. If New England goes in there and gets 14 points up on them, that becomes a different game. Now Tebow's got to play different style that maybe they can't run the balls effectively. The offense has to win the game, and if it doesn't, if it gets to halftime like it did at the Jets game, and all of a sudden it gets to a one-possession game in the fourth quarter, it favors Denver.
Here's my fear with the Broncos, and I hate to bring this up, and I hope I don't jinx them. You look at Willis McGahee year by year, right? 284 rushing attempts, 2004. 325 in 05, 259 in 06, 294 in 07. Drops down to 170 in 08. Drops down to 109 in 09. Drops down to 100 in 2010. Now we're at 182 with 4 games to go. He's going to end up at about maybe 260, 270 if he stays healthy. Now you're asking him to also be your lead guy in the playoffs. I don't see him holding up for 5 more games. It seems far-fetched to me.
I think it'll be a problem. Denver is a lot like San Francisco in the style that they play, so the back is so important to maintaining that style, whether it's Frank Gore or whether it's Willis McGahee. So I think you're right. He's going to have to try to hold on. But the one thing we know the last 2 years in Baltimore, he's had a lot of rest. So even though he's had those 100 carries, he's kind of a little fresher. Now, to think he can do it 2 years in a row, I don't know, but maybe for 5 games he can.
Right now, who do you see coming out of the AFC? Because it's really messed up. And I know you're probably going to say the Patriots, but you might say the Steelers. I'm going to say you say the Steelers. Who do you say?
Well, you gave, when we were talking that scenario, then obviously if Denver's the 4th seed and they're playing Baltimore, Baltimore's the 5th seed. So I think Pittsburgh's the most complete team in the AFC right now, offensively, defensively, in the kicking game. So I think they certainly could be the number 1 seed, but they could also be the 5th seed. If Baltimore keeps winning and they've got the tiebreaker with Baltimore becomes the 2 seed, New England's the 1 seed, and then, Pittsburgh's got to go into Denver and play them, and, obviously that'll be a tougher game for Denver because Pittsburgh can score points quicker than what Baltimore can.
That's a great point, and I should have mentioned that. Baltimore, last 4 games. I just had Pittsburgh just running the slate, but I guess Baltimore could do it too. They're home for Indy this week. That's a win. At San Diego in Week 15, I'm not personally sold on this whole San Diego resurgence, and I don't think we should be having a celebration that Phil Rivers played 2 straight games without throwing an interception. I'm sorry, I'm not throwing a party for that. Home for Cleveland Week 16, and then at Cincinnati Week 17. I think that's the one they drop. Wouldn't you say? I think San Diego's a fraud. You agree they're a fraud, right?
Yeah, I think there's no question they're not going to hold it. Their defense isn't good enough, and I don't care, what they did in Jacksonville because Jacksonville's offense. I don't think Jacksonville could score 21 points against air. So, I don't think how you count that. Jacksonville's not good enough. I think San Diego will certainly fall by the wayside. Jared Gaither at left tackle got away with it last week. Can he get away with it? Can he get away with it for 4 more weeks? I don't think so, and that'll be a problem. But Pittsburgh's got to go out to San Francisco. See, Pittsburgh got a huge break because San Francisco has to keep winning, and New Orleans has to keep winning because that's the 2 seed that's up for grabs.
Yep.
So San Francisco, when they play Pittsburgh, they're going to have to take that game seriously. I know San Francisco's won the West, but they're going to want the 2 seed. You're not going to want to go in there and be the 3 seed and have to compete and do all that stuff. I think you want the 2 seed. You want to play Green Bay the last game.
Pittsburgh has 2 Cleveland games left, home for St. Louis, and then San Fran in week 15.
So they're going to the only game in question here is they're either going to be 12-4 or 13-3.
Yep. And I don't know, Mike. I'm not sold on this San Fran team. Like, really,
well, neither am I. But I mean, right now you can't beat nobody has enough power to beat them the way they're playing. There's only a few teams that could play them.
But flip this around. I think they could beat Pittsburgh on a Monday night in a week where Pittsburgh, it's a Monday night game. They're fired up for it, but not really. It's just one of the 17 games. Maybe they have Baltimore coming up. Like, they're not 100% focused. That's a game that if they win, if Pittsburgh wins, they know that Cincinnati can then hand them the number 1, their number 2 seed next week by beating Baltimore at home. And Cincinnati will be playing for a wild card spot most likely. Right. Then you look at, here's who San Fran's beaten. Seattle. They won at Cincinnati. They won at Philly in a win that doesn't seem that good now because Philly's a fraud. Killed Tampa. They beat Detroit. That seemed like a great win. Now maybe not because Detroit certainly is starting to look like a fraud. They beat Cleveland. They win at Washington. Their best win was beating the Giants, but the Giants were pretty banged up in that game. They beat Arizona, lost to Baltimore, and then they killed St. Louis. I'm not sold. I'm just not. I'm sold on them as they're definitely a playoff team. They're definitely legit. But if I think Pittsburgh is the second best team in football, and if they go into San Fran and they say we have to have this game, I don't think San Fran can hang with them.
I don't think they'll have a hard time. They'll have a hard time covering Pittsburgh's receivers. I mean, that's going to be the biggest issue. They're not going to run the ball effectively on Pittsburgh or score a lot of points, let's say. I mean, San Francisco relishes a good field goal. They like a field goal, so they like to play the game close. Pittsburgh, with those explosion receivers that they have with Wallace, with Sanders, and with Antonio Brown, that's really the Achilles heel to the 49ers. If you can spread them out, assuming you can protect, you can attack the secondary. But the teams that they've been playing, the Seattles, the St. Louis's, the Arizonas, they can't really get away with spreading you out and be effective. New Orleans could, Green Bay can, New England could. Baltimore really can, and even Baltimore beat them doing it. I mean, Houston would give them trouble because they could spread them out. Certainly not with the quarterback right now, but those are the kind of teams that give them trouble. Detroit gave them trouble. Detroit just couldn't close the game out.
Yeah, and then a San Fran defender would say that Baltimore beat Pittsburgh twice this year with a certain recipe, and that San Fran. By the way, people from San Francisco hate when I say San Fran, so I apologize. I can't help it. San Francisco could just basically do a Baltimore impersonation, which they're fairly similar teams, right?
No question. There are definitely similar teams. The difference between Baltimore and San Francisco is Flacco's ability to throw the vertical pass and Torrey Smith exploding down the field. Now, Ted Ginn can make some plays down the field. And obviously Alex Smith has been inconsistent throwing the ball down the field. But Flacco's ability to throw on the third level is what really separates Baltimore, gives them the most hope of eventually becoming a Super Bowl team. I mean, he has to play that way. And when they spread you out, assuming they can protect, they're a much better football team when they do that because they at least have some speed on the field with Torrey Smith and those 2 tight ends.
Do you see Pittsburgh is now in playoff mode because they don't want the 5 seed? They want to win out, and they want to get to the playoffs. Do you see the old guys in their defense holding up for another 2 months?
No, I think they certainly will. I think this death of the Pittsburgh defense was pronounced too early. They're starting to play really well now. And now Jason World has come along as an outside rusher to go with James Harrison, who's probably playing the best football of the season right now. So their defense is really, to me, in peak form right now, and they're very difficult to handle, and they proved against New England that they could play man-to-man against New England. So now there's a sense of confidence that if they have to go play man-to-man against certain teams, they can. Baltimore's their Achilles heel. They had trouble handling Torrey Smith's speed down the field.
So the Steelers, if they finish 13-3, they get the 1 seed because they already beat the Pats. I'm assuming Baltimore finishes 12-4. Pittsburgh gets the 1 seed. Then Denver and Baltimore have a slugfest in round 1. Pittsburgh gets the winner of that. I think it would be really hard for Baltimore to beat Pittsburgh 3 times.
I think so. It's hard to beat any team 3 times, yes.
Yeah. And I also think that the Tebow magic probably ends against Pittsburgh. I mean, if they were able to beat Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh, we now have to start ranking them alongside the 2001 Patriots as one of the all-time teams of destinies. Meanwhile, you'd have the Patriots. I mean, couldn't you argue that you'd almost rather be the 2 seed? You get Houston you get either Houston or Tennessee in round 1. I mean, I want to play Houston and I want to play Tennessee if I'm the Patriots. That's like almost a win.
Yeah. The only way Houston could beat New England is if they had the ball for 40 minutes. I mean, that's what they did against Atlanta. They had the ball like 37 minutes. They have to play keep away at this point.
The Pats are good against the run. I almost said we. The running teams we're good against. It's the teams that can throw the ball that's going to be the real trouble against the Pats.
Against scheme runs like Houston runs, I think New England can match up. Against certainly style of offense, I think the misnomer about the New England defense is if you just take the fourth quarter of some of these games when they're way ahead, Indianapolis, Oakland, Philadelphia, there's a lot of yards getting piled up, and they're meaningless yards. They don't make a lot of plays, certainly. They're not. I'm not to imply they're a talented defense, but when the game was on the line against the Jets, when the game was on the line against Philadelphia, when the game's on the line, they seem to have enough defense to get off the field.
So, if the Texans got the 3rd seed, let's say the Jets get that last wild card spot.
Jets have to win 11. The Jets have to post 11 to get in.
If the
Jets just get to 10, they can't get in because Tennessee can get to 10. Oakland could conceivably get to 10. I don't see how they get in. The Jets lose all the tiebreakers because they already have 5 AFC losses.
Wow. So, so Cincinnati is actually in a slightly better. The Cincinnati is 6-4 against the conference. Tennessee's 5-4. You like the Cincinnati team? Are they a playoff team?
I think they're a good team. I think they're like the Lions. They're a year away from being a good playoff team.
Yeah.
I really think that they're a year away. I think the quarterbacks, as the season goes on, you hit the walls, a young quarterback. Defensively, losing Leon Hall really hurt them. I mean, that's just an injury that it's hard to overcome. So I think, when they play, look, losing to Pittsburgh twice, they got further away from Pittsburgh than closer to them. They played them much better at home. Usually they play them well in Pittsburgh, but it wasn't even a game. I think Cincinnati and Detroit are similar teams, and they're a year away from really being legitimate playoff teams. They might make it this year, but it's going to be one and done.
And they're also in a similar spot where if you're looking at Detroit, you think, oh, yeah, I'm selling all my Detroit stock. They've looked terrible the last couple of weeks. But the reality is they played Green Bay and New Orleans. Those are bad matchups for them. And I think Cincinnati just came off this 4-game stretch. They played Baltimore. Oh, no, I'm sorry. They played Pittsburgh twice. They played at Baltimore. And now everybody's like, Cincinnati, they're a year away. But now they have T.J. Yates coming to Cincinnati this week. And then they followed up by at the Rams. The Rams have packed it in. Home for Arizona. And then that Baltimore game. They might be able to get to 11 wins. It's conceivable.
Yeah, if
even
they get
with
to 10,
Leon Hall.
if the Jets lose to Philly or if the Jets lose to the Giants, can the Jets run the table? I think that's really to build this thing accurately would be, do you think the Jets can run the table? I don't. I mean, they barely beat Washington.
I don't either.
Maybe Washington's better than I give them credit for. Maybe Washington upsets New England this week. I don't see it, but maybe they do.
Way.
But the Jets really, that was an ugly win for the Jets. The Jets' last 2 wins haven't really been where you say, boy, that Jet team's really coming back.
And I keep coming back to that Denver game. I thought they quit in that game. And I can't, if I'm looking at the Jets, can I take them seriously this year? Look, teams have made runs. We saw it with the Packers last year where the Packers, they played that 7-3 loss against Detroit. And everybody said, right off the Packers, they're out. And then they got hot. I'm not saying the Jets can't get hot, but I thought they quit on that last drive. And, Tebow bowling over Revis. Tebow scrambling while two defensive backs just kind of watched him and didn't do anything. Like that, to me, there was some real signs of trouble in that game that I would not like if I'm a Jets fan. Do you agree?
I agree, and I think when you watch him against Buffalo, if Stevie Johnson catches the in route that's going to go to the end zone, they're going to lose that game, even though they got ahead of them. They were going to drive back down the field, and Stevie Johnson misses that catch, and then in the end zone, there's a ball thrown to maybe about a foot behind him. He doesn't make that catch either. So there's a game that they didn't play very well against Buffalo and could have easily lost that. Last week against the Redskins have a lead going into the fourth quarter. The Jets made enough plays, the Redskins, Rex Grossman, whatever. The Jets are going to have to take their game up another notch to be able to think they're a playoff team, consistently win the next four. Could they beat Philly? I think Philly's a tough matchup for them. Could they beat the Giants? And the Giants need to have it. I think that's a tough matchup for them.
And then they have at Miami last week. Miami might be the third or fourth best team in the league. Juggernaut. Break up the Dolphins. Unbelievable.
Miami played them well. The Monday night game, game got away from them. If Marshall stays in bounds on on that throw, maybe it's a different game. But, right now to me, the Jets have problems defensively because unless they can cover you really well, unless you only have one receiver, they can take you out. But they have no pass rush whatsoever. They can't generate. I know Aaron Maben. People are going to say, well, Aaron Maben fell off Tom Brady twice. He couldn't even get him on the ground. So he's running around the corner, and sometimes he gets sacks because he's just there. Comeback player of the year, hardly. I don't see it. But, people have their opinions, and certainly I have mine. But I don't see a pass rush for the Jets, and I see an offense that if the ball's in Sanchez's hands too much, it's going to be in your hands well.
It's funny, though. They won a game against the Chargers. They never should have won. They never should have won that Buffalo game. The Redskins game they easily could have blown. But, they are winning close games like they have the last couple of years, and they do get these lucky breaks. I always talk about Mark Sanchez's horseshoe up his butt. And Denver's doing the same things. We're like, oh, Denver, they're great in close games. They turn it on at the end. Like, I guess you could say the Jets are doing that too, right?
Yeah, no, they seem to sense the moment, and they obviously the Denver game they didn't, but for the most part, down the stretch against San Diego, that game was, San Diego didn't score in the second half, I don't think, in that game. And then, the Buffalo has a chance to come right down the field against them. Denver went 95 yards against this vaunted defense, and then, last week against Washington had opportunities to do it. So I think the Jets have some issues. Can they resolve them? Yeah. Can they win 4 in a row? I think it's going to be hard to be that lucky 4 times in a row.
In a vacuum, who do you like out of the Jets, Bengals, and Titans, just from an upside standpoint? And we'll throw in the Raiders, too, just for the hell of it.
I think the Raiders have the most upside because they can, if they come back with Darren McFadden and Denarius Thomas, I lost my train of thought here, but Delarius Moore, I think that certainly they have a lot of skill players that they can really create some problems. And when Carson Palmer can protect the football, he didn't play as badly as you might think in Miami when you watch the tape, but they're a dangerous team. They just can't play any run defense, and they have to play a shootout with you. And I think that's always dangerous. I
emailed you about TJ Yates, or I texted you. It's like, TJ Yates, not terrible. Yeah,
no.
Half decent, I would even say. But then Andre Johnson went out, and it just feels like this Texans team is snake-bitten. Like at some point you just pass the point of no return with bad luck, right?
Right, and I felt like, when I was at the Raiders, we used to have a saying in the building, we're just always an injury away from having a good team. Because we always had a guy that we had to play because the owner wanted to play him, that if he could ever get hurt, we could replace him with a better player. And to me, when Matt Leinart got hurt, that was like the classic, we're just an injury away from having a good team. And T.J. Yates makes them better than Matt Leinart. I don't care what they say. T.J. Yates can throw the ball. He threw it down the field against Atlanta. And look, they play well. Atlanta, Matt Ryan missed 2 or 3 wide-open guys down the field, and Houston kept the game close and won it.
And they can control the ball. They run it. I agree with you. I watched every snap that Leinart had before he got hurt, and I was not impressed. Every pass, he had a high completion rate, but it was because every pass he threw was like a screen pass or a very short, easy pass. Yates can actually do some stuff. And,
Yates can throw the ball.
Yeah, and he had some poise. Like there's a couple times when it seemed like he was going to get sacked, and he did the old Brady sidestep move. I think he might. It's not inconceivable that he's not half decent. He's a 5th-round rookie, and maybe he's half decent. And that's, if they can get Andre Johnson back, it's still a team I don't think, I'd be a little worried with the Pats. But the Andre Johnson, it just seems like he's snake bit this year. 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, and I don't think he's coming back that quickly. I watched that, and when he pulled up, that looks pretty bad.
Yeah.
And if he goes back too soon, it's just going to happen again. Houston's problem is going to be, can they hold up at corner? Can Jason Allen hold up against a team that can really throw the football effectively? Can Williams Jackson hold up at corner?
Yeah.
Can those guys hold up? I don't know if they can, but they didn't look like they could against Atlanta, but Matt Ryan couldn't make the connection. So they did hold up, and I think they're a lot like a lot of teams in the league. They have weaknesses, but they've been able to overcome them with their front, their ability to rush the passer. I think they've done a really good job of hiding their sins, and when they control the football the way they do, and you only have it 23 minutes, and the other team, and you have it 37, it's tough to beat them.
And signing Jonathan Joseph over Asamoah would have been much more expensive. Turned out to be pretty shrewd. Everybody was like, hey, if they're going to get Joseph, why not just spend a little more for Asamoah? Kind of looks like Asamoah might be on the downside.
Well, I think they played it smart there. They probably thought they weren't going to get Asamoah, and so they took a bird in the hand, and the bird in the hand was pretty good.
Yeah.
And Asamoah, I think before everybody judge Asamoah this season, I think the Eagles defensively, because of the decision to go with Juan Castillo as a defense coordinator, I don't know if you can really evaluate everybody on that defense. I think it's probably not a fair evaluation because they're just kind of misplaced. I mean, when they signed Nnamdi, we said this on the podcast, they really had two starting corners and a backup. But for whatever reason, they tried to make one of these guys a slot corner, and they can't play slot corner. It was a fact that Nnamdi couldn't play slot. We tried it in Oakland for 2 years, 3 years, and he wasn't even a player then. So,
but Mike, how can you misjudge? But how can you misjudge a guy's talents and capabilities like that? That's the part I don't get. Like how.
Sometimes people think they're smarter than they really are. I mean, I think when you look at Philadelphia, and you see what they've tried to do, whether it's the insistence on playing some of the guys they play, what they've done. I think Vince Young is your backup quarterback. Are you really that smart? Are you really that smart? Are you really that good at turning quarterbacks around? Did you watch Vince Young play at Tennessee? I mean, did you really study him and what he can capable of doing? Did you really want to put the ball in his hands 40 times a night? You're a passing guy.
That's another example of your body language leadership guy. And that's a guy that he had it when he was at Texas. He had it for a little bit there in Tennessee, and it went away, and it never came back. And you could see it in that Thursday night game. Just deer in the headlights, upset, like shoulders sunk on the sideline, just with his head arched back. Like that's your perfect example of like somebody that the team is looking at going, that's our leader? Yeah, exactly. That's the guy that's supposed to inspire us? But for me,
I think Andy Reid's at fault on that because when you study Vince Young, it's not Vince's fault. Vince needs to be around an offense that he can utilize his skills 24 times to throw at a game and run the football effectively. Vince isn't, I'm going to give you the ball 50 times and let's go win the game, Vince. That's too much volume for Vince. That's too hard for Vince. It's hard for a lot of quarterbacks. And I think that when you signed Vince Young, you had to know that. You had to know that, hey, if we got to put him in the game, we have to manage the game differently. But with Reid, whoever plays quarterback, you get the same plays as the guy had him before.
So, NFC, quickly. I think we crossed the Bears off. I don't think you can recover from Cutler and Forte. I just don't see how they compete after that.
I said this to you before. Cutler's like the MVP light. What he did for that team in Chicago, people don't appreciate. Chris Collinsworth said it on Showtime yesterday, and he's right. I wrote about it 3 weeks ago. I wrote about it after I left your house that day when he got hurt. He's like the most valuable player of the league because that line's so bad. People don't realize how bad that offensive line is. Now they do.
Yeah. Well, I think they lose to Denver this weekend, and they're going to lose to Green Bay in Week 16, and that puts them at 9-7, which is probably knocking them out of the playoffs. Meanwhile, you have the Lions here that everybody's pretty anxious to write off, and it does seem like they're a year away and they're immature and all that stuff. They have at Minnesota, or home for Minnesota, at Oakland, home for San Diego, and then at Green Bay. They could win. They could win Green 3 of those.
Green Bay to be the perfect, and so they go 10-6. I think it gets them in.
You think they win 3 of those 4, unless they blow the Oakland game? Yeah, they'd have to blow the Oakland game, which is 100% totally probable. Now this Atlanta team, both of us have not liked for this entire season. I felt a little vindicated with how much they stunk in that Houston game. They're going at Carolina, which just seems like a classic Carolina scores 38 points and beat them possibility. Home for Jacksonville, at New Orleans, Monday night ESPN, day after Christmas, and then home for Tampa. If they lose that Carolina game, that's 2-2, and they don't get it either.
They're in trouble. But Carolina's so bad on defense. The only way they lose that game is if they lose 45-41. I mean, they just shouldn't lose that game. I mean, Carolina's going to score a little bit. It might be close for 2 quarters, 3 quarters, but eventually Carolina's defense is too bad to keep up. They had way too many injuries, so I don't know how they do that.
All right,
New Orleans going to need to win that Monday night game because, again, if San Francisco stubs their toe, they want the number 2 seed. So that's what's really going to play in effect. I mean, New Orleans is going to win the South, but they're going to try to get that 2 seed in San Francisco with the Pittsburgh game. There's a conceivability that they could stub their toe, and all of a sudden New Orleans slips in.
Giants at Dallas, home for Washington, at the Jets, home for Dallas. That also feels like 2-2. Maybe we're going to have like 5, 9, and 7 teams. Is that possible?
I think so. I think the Giants aren't going to run the table, nor are the Cowboys going to run the table. And I don't think the Lions maybe the Falcons could run the table. I think it's going to be hard to win in New Orleans.
Stop.
But I think the biggest point here is you want to play Green Bay in the championship game, and the way you do that is to assure yourself the 2 seed.
So
the 2 seed is vital.
Maybe Chicago can't. Maybe Chicago's not out. Even if they go 2-2 and they're in this crazy multi-team tiebreaker, they could still beat Seattle at home. They could still beat Minnesota in Week 17. At that point, Minnesota's playing for a draft pick. And then Cutler's coming back right around then, right? All of a sudden, that's a pretty scary 6 seed. They'll have Forte and Cutler back. They'll have snuck into the playoffs. And all of a sudden, that's a team I don't want to play.
Yeah.
Because I like that team.
I don't think Chicago's out of it because Chicago can win games just with Devin Hester returning a punt. Yep. So, that they do have some sense of an offense, but it's going to be tough. I don't think anybody's going to run away from Chicago, nor Chicago going to run away from anybody else. The Giants have such a tough schedule. The Lions, I think they're really in the best position because they can win 3 of those 4 games.
Yeah.
Well, and that gets them 10 wins. Atlanta should get them 10 wins too. I don't see how Atlanta doesn't win 3 of those 4 games you mentioned.
They've already lost 5. Out of those 5 losses, did you feel like they lost to Chicago opening day? They lose to Tampa by 3. They lose. Green Bay was probably one of the best games they played all year. They lost by 11. They lose to New Orleans in OT on that terrible 4th down call, and then they legitimately lost to Houston. I felt like last week.
And they struggled to beat Seattle out in Seattle. They struggled to beat Seattle out there. No, I'm not in love with Atlanta, but I look at Carolina. They're kind of beat up. Tampa, by the time they play Tampa, everybody's going to not care. I mean, now Raheem Morris has decided to get tough with the Tampa Bay Bucks. It's a little late now, Raheem. But
Raheem.
who else can they lose? New Orleans is the only game they could possibly they could lose.
Yeah. Last question. Green Bay. Feels like 16-0. That was the game to lose last week, and they pulled it out.
Green Bay has some really tremendous skill players offensively, and what they do is incredible. But when you really study them, and especially in the Giants game, their defense has really taken a step backwards, and it's going to catch them eventually. I don't know if they can continue, but Aaron Rodgers is so magnificent that you can't really get to their defense as well. The Giants did. The Giants had their chances. I think the Giants, the touchdown pass the Giants scored was really Eli throwing the ball to Hakeem Nicks. They were going to run the ball there to get the clock moving to try to keep the ball away, but there was an eye contact play, and he threw it to Hakeem Nicks in the end zone for the touchdown, which ended up being a great play, but unfortunately too much time on the clock. Yeah. But I think the Packers have holes in their defense. Their defensive line isn't as dominating as it was last year. Woodson's not as effective as a player as he was, especially in coverage. The interception to Eli throws to Clay Matthews Jr., Woodson's easily should have been called for defensive pass interference. He almost tackled the receiver on a double move, and it didn't get called. So there's some flaws in Green Bay. I'm not sure that San Francisco can exploit them. I think Dallas could get to them. New Orleans could get to them, but very few other teams could.
They remind me a lot of the 07 Pats, which is, ironic because of what they're trying to do, but it does seem like it's the same recipe to try to beat them. You want to limit their possessions. What a Hollywood script would be. What it would be if the Packers go to the Super Bowl at 18-0 and the Patriots are there. Well, we don't have the right team. It seems like the type of team would be the team that the Giants had in 2007. The ball, a little bit like kind of what the Niners have. Ball control, waste time, rush the passer, hard hitting, keep coming and coming after Rodgers, make it a 21-17 or a 17-14 type game, and don't match touchdowns with them because you'll lose.
Right. And that's the Niners specialty. They're good in the red zone, and the Niners are really good in the return game. They're really good on special teams, and they can play well in the red zone. So that gives them a chance. Especially, what is the weather going to be like in Green Bay if the Niners go up there in late January? It's going to favor the Niners because the ball's going to be frozen solid, and it's going to be what team can really run the football effectively. Now the Packers, look, they throw it well in the cold. I don't want to minimize that, but you never know what the weather's going to be like.
So at gunpoint, you're saying Green Bay, Pittsburgh.
I think Green Bay, Pittsburgh are the two best teams right now. Yes.
Your party crasher. One team you'd pick to break into that top two for the Super Bowl.
You
can't say the Dolphins.
I think New England could still break into it. I think New England's defense is not as good as it needs to be, but I think offensively they can do some things to control the game, and I think they're getting better. I think they could do it, and I think New Orleans. I think those are the 4 best teams. Baltimore is a scary team because Baltimore, when their offense is on and they can effectively move the ball, they're good enough. But I never know with their offense. It's too predictable for me.
Yeah, Baltimore is like one of those boxers that can knock out anybody else in their division, but can also just get knocked out. It's just,
I think a lot of what Baltimore is the crew that officiates them. If you can jam these receivers and play physical on them, then all of a sudden you're going to get, like Jacksonville did with them, then you can get away with it. But if you get a crew that calls a lot of things, then you're not going to get away with it.
All right. Mike Lombardi, stay away from those donuts. You keep bringing them to my house. I keep staring at them and eventually eating them. We will see you. Oh, last thing, you want to talk Sixers really quickly.
Yeah.
So I think you're screwed because it makes no sense to use the Amnesty and Elton brand. And, why are you going to pay him to play for somebody else? So now you don't have enough cap room. I think you have the same team that you had last year. Maybe they do like a little mid-level exception guy. What would be your ideal guy for them to get? Like a power forward? Yeah,
I think they need somebody to go in there and bang and could play some defense and can get rebounds and control the game.
Would you want Chris Humphries?
Although, look, Chris Humphries, I think the resurgence of Reggie Bush has a lot to do with Chris Humphries more than anybody.
Yeah, I think you're right. But Chris Humphries was the 5th leading rebounder last year.
Yeah, I'll take anybody. I'm all for it. I think they need some bangers in there. I just think, they got to do something to create a way to where they can get one star player because they have a lot of nice pieces, but they don't have a star.
Well, you better hope Evan Turner makes a giant leap. I'm distraught because the Celtics. I thought yesterday they screwed up this Rondo thing. It seems like now they have a better chance of getting them, but it's gotten to the point where Rondo just is. There's no way to salvage this now. They told him they weren't trading him, and then it comes out that they've been frantically trying to trade him. I just don't think he's checked out at this point. So now you have to trade him one way or the other is how this plays out.
So if you get Chris Paul, is that a good deal?
Depends what I'm giving up. It's a good deal for this year. But do I know Chris Paul's re-signing? Does Chris Paul say, I will re-sign with the Celtics if you make this trade? Yeah, then it's a good deal. But to rent him for a year and hope he re-signs, that makes no sense. You're mortgaging the next 10 years for 2011, 2012?
Yeah.
Who does that? Nobody does that. At that point, just then trade for Nash and Gortat. Isn't that what the Minnesota
Vikings did with Brett Favre? Isn't that what they did with Brett Favre?
Right. Well, at that point, I tweeted this today. I really think I think they're going to have to trade Rondo now if they don't get Paul. And now do you think about Steve Nash and Marcin Gortat for Jermaine O'Neal and Rondo? And you make one last run with Nash, KG, Pierce, and Ray Allen. You have a center in Gortat. Then maybe you try to re-sign everybody for one more run in 2013 or whatever. But, unfortunately, I think that's where this is headed for them. I just think they really misplayed this. It's, the really interesting thing here, Mike, is that it's so hard now to talk trade with anybody because it's going to get out. Like, I do not envy these GMs. How do you even bring up anything to anybody? It's just going to get out. It has to happen in 2011 with Twitter and blogs and reporters and everything. Everybody finds out everything, right?
Right, yeah, and I think ultimately you just have to rely on your players' professionalism. Like, I don't always necessarily agree that Rondo can't come back even after you talk trade. A lot of players have their best year after they almost got traded. Look, Allen Iverson had his best year in Philadelphia when he thought he was getting traded to Detroit when Matt Geiger wouldn't go ahead and walk away from a trade kicker.
True,
so
but I mean,
I think
this
he can
is a
overcome
3 year. This is a 3 year thing with him, though, where, you know, after the 2009 playoffs, they kind of threw him under the bus and they said, you know, you know, they leaked that he hadn't shown up on time for one of the playoff games, all that stuff. Then last year they kind of quietly shopped him around a little bit before the contract extension got signed. He took less money to stay, and now they said, we're not trading you, and now it turns out they're trading him. Like, at some point you break as a player and you just say, F these guys, right?
Yeah, well,
it's
I think
happen.
I think Ainge, obviously being an ex-player, can at least go in and have a conversation. If he's honest with the player, then you have a chance to salvage it. But it's when you start lying to the guy, that's when it really gets ugly.
But that's kind of what they did. They told him, we love Rajon Rondo, we don't want to trade him, and they're trying to trade him. Like, I don't, maybe you can't call it lying, but it's certainly not telling the truth. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's yeah, they have to find a way to, somebody's got to communicate whether he's doing it with his agent. I think ultimately when these rumors come out, there's got to be a conversation with the agent that, look, we're not really doing this, this is just talk, and here's where we really are. And if you're honest with the agent and you do have a level of communication, but it's when you get caught up in lies is when it becomes really ugly. Then you lose trust in the player.
Well, it reminds me of Rick Pitino, who was the all-time liar that in the history of Boston sports would just say one thing as he was doing another.
Right.
And when we traded Chauncey Billups for Kenny Anderson, Pitino came on this local show that was hosted by Bob Lobel, and Bob Lobel's like, you know, do you feel like you gave up on Chauncey? Keep in mind they just traded him after 50 games, and Pitino goes, oh, we didn't give up on Chauncey. We thought he was fantastic. It was like, you didn't give up on Chauncey. You traded him after 50 games. Are you kidding me? But yeah, it's just these people they spin things like, and they actually believe it, which is the scary part. And that was the scary thing about Pitino. Like, it actually seemed like he believed his own BS. And I do wonder if Ainge has hit that point. But anyway, we could talk about this offline. Hope to see you in LA soon. We'll read you on NFL.com.
I'll be there.
We will look for you on NFL Network. Our pal, Mike Lombardi. Thanks again.
Thanks, Bill.
You know what? We went so long with Mike Lombardi that we are going to take it to a part 2. If you want to hear my conversation with Jack O about Albert Pujols, the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Angels, all that good stuff, take it over to Pod Center or iTunes for part 2 of the BS Report. Thanks.
So I get to sign off. Whoa!
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at Pod Center at ESPNradio.com.
Peace out.